I'm Myra. And I'm Danica. And this is Black Women Healing Podcast. And on this podcast, you can join us every Monday where we have raw, relatable conversations about mental wellness.
And we push you to do the work.
Let's heal. This is Black Women Healing Podcast.
Hey y'all, we're back with another episode of Black Women Healing Podcast. And we have another special guest. But we're going to start with our segment of this or that. And I was thinking about, and so to explain this or that, I'm literally just going to say two different options. And then we're going to choose and talk about why we would choose that option. So pretty simple. So this or that, would you prefer 90s R&B or 2000s R&B? And in my head, I was thinking of some songs, and a song I was thinking of was like Brandy, Sitting in My Room, Monica. Those are like that 90s, or even like Toni Braxton. And then 2000s, I immediately think of like the Ashanti, like those types of people. But that's just to give some reference. So Myra, what are you thinking? 2000s or 90s R&B or 2000s R&B?
Well, first, I want to start and say I love that we have two completely different references. Like the people that you said did not come to my mind. And I think that's what I love about this era and time, because you said Brandy and Monica, but I was thinking Mariah Carey. And I was thinking like Jermaine Dupri and the Brat and like all his people. And then when you said the early 2000s, my mind went to just Jagged Edge running everything, Jagged Edge and like Usher. So it's interesting hearing like the two. But as you said it, I thought I was really into 90s R&B, and now that made me realize I'm more into like the early 2000s, because there's pictures of me literally as a kid dancing, and when you asked what song, it was always to like a Jagged Edge, like Where the Party At, like anything pretty much like Jagged Edge or like Cisco. The thong song was my thing. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I sure was loving the thong song. I didn't know they were talking about sandals or what, but anyway.
Oh my goodness. The thong sandals. Wow.
My mind did not go to thong panties. I don't know what they was talking about, but I was like, that dress is so scandalous. Didn't know what I was singing, but whatever. But I would definitely say the early 2000s, just because I still listen to it. I listen to 90s here and there, but the early 2000s just brings back a lot of memories. And I love dancing. And so as a kid, most of the songs I danced to was early 2000s songs. So yeah. What about you, Danica?
Yeah, no, I like both. I think some of the 90s, I feel like I probably, like the 90s R&B, I probably didn't learn until 2000s, maybe even 2010. Even sometimes now, certain songs, I'll be like, wait, oh, that's from the 90s? Like, okay, I really like that song. So I think that when I look back now, it's like, ooh, it was some bangers in the 90s. But growing up, it was mainly the 2000s. And those, like, obviously I was around for and could listen to. I might not knew the meaning of all of them, like you're saying, but most definitely could remember. So, okay, if I had to pick, I actually am going to say 90s. I'm going to say 90s just because I feel like the 2000s is timeless too, but the 90s just felt more connected to like that rhythm and blues. Like when I think of it, I feel like, what'd you say?
What's the top song that comes to mind?
To be honest, I want to say Escape, like just kicking, just oh my goodness. I'm thinking of like Kelly Price, like Faith Evans, like come on, like them is the people, like you listen to a Faith Evans song, Kelly Price, even the song it could be about happy. You want to cry just because they sing so good. Like, I don't know. I'm going to say 90s R&B. What about you, Valerie?
I got to go with the 90s. I got it. I mean, In Vogue, what are we talking about? I mean, do we get any better than that? And plus, I mean, I'm going to date myself, but I went to college. I went to Spelman in 98 and 99 and right when a lot of Lauryn Hill music was hype. I mean, that crossed lots of genres, but I think the 90s are just classic.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for engaging in our little activity, this or that. And so Let's get started. Yeah, I most definitely am excited to introduce our guest. So today we have Valerie Cordero. She is a dynamic nonprofit leader, mental health advocate, and ethnomusicologist. After dedicating several years of her life traveling to and studying arts and culture in Havana, Cuba, she began her nonprofit career at Families for Depression Awareness. Valerie accepted co-executive director leadership at FFDA in 2016, and since then has become a prominent voice for suicide prevention, mental health parity, and health equity. Valerie has advanced national discussions of mood disorders and has been featured on major media outlets such as Reader's Digest, Better Homes and Gardens, and New York Magazine's Vertical The Cut. In 2023, she presented at several conferences, including the Suicide and the Black Church Conference, Psych Congress, Black Mental Health Symposium, and the National Federation of Families Annual Conference. Valerie draws from her decades of experience to champion the role of the mental health family caregiver and advocate for culturally responsive, affordable, and accessible mental health care. Valerie received her BA from Spelman College and her MA and PhD degrees in ethnomusicology from UCLA. Her volunteer roles have included serving on advisory and nonprofit boards. Valerie utilizes her Spanish-speaking skills to make cross-cultural connections in her community. Valerie, this bio, oh my goodness.
You didn't have to read the whole thing, but yeah, that's all me.
We needed to hear this. We needed to hear this. Oh my goodness, you've done so much. And so we're so thankful to have you today. And we just want to go ahead and jump in. So can you define mood disorders in layman terms so that our audience really understands what that means?
Absolutely. So mood disorders refer to mental health conditions, medical conditions that affect mood, thinking, feeling as well. So depression, both forms of bipolar disorder, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, as well as dysthymia, which is the low-level depression that people are sometimes affected by. So this is to differentiate those mental health conditions from other psychiatric conditions, or let's say anxiety disorders, and other conditions that people might be affected by.
Thank you for breaking that down, because I feel like oftentimes people just don't understand disorders as a whole. So when we are talking about mood disorders, I wanted to make sure they understood that. And so just leaning a little bit more into your work, what prompted this journey for you as far as like stepping into this space and then deciding to do this work that you do?
So I come from a family, I'm a Black woman. I come from a family of Black people. And unfortunately, our family has been touched by, like a lot of other families have been touched by, depression and bipolar disorder. Also had a suicide of a loved one when I was very young. And so the topic has always affected me personally. I also saw how it affects us as a people, and the repercussions of not talking about mental health or pushing it under the rug, or not understanding how depression or bipolar disorder can affect us and affect our children and affect people for generations to come. That's something I really wanted to dedicate my life to raising awareness of. And I also truly believe in the power of families in the work I do, but also within the Black community. And that if you have a strong family unit, whatever that looks like, it doesn't have to look the same for every family, but if you have a strong family unit, you are in a much more powerful position to address issues of any kind of health condition, but certainly mental health condition. If you have your allies behind you, your parents, your grandparents, your cousins, your siblings, if you're all on the same page about addressing a mental health condition, that can put you in so much more powerful position. So I did not go to school, as people heard from my bio. This is not what I went to school for. I was focused on music for the majority of my academic career. And when I finished my PhD and was just kind of looking at what was out there for work, for jobs and employment, I found that a lot of my skills that I had developed being in higher education and going through a PhD process were transferable to the nonprofit world. And so I was already writing grants and talking to people and gaining the trust of community members in order to do my research and connecting with people. So all of those skills transferred really easily to the nonprofit world. I've also found, as somebody who was interested in and wanted to have a family and be an active mother, that nonprofit, the structure of at least the nonprofit I work for, has been very conducive to having that work experience and being able to be a working person in the world, a woman, but also have time to be a mom and to be active in that role as well.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And so, to dive a little bit deeper into just the work that you do, how has it impacted your mental health specifically, both the pros and the cons?
Well, I'll speak generally about nonprofit work first, and then I can talk about the nonprofit work that I do. So nonprofit work is definitely not for the faint of heart. And nobody gets into nonprofit work, I think, to be rich, because you're not going to be rich working for the greater good of society. But it's very fulfilling work, and you can find a lot of meaning in your work if you are doing something that will ultimately be helping others, especially if you're helping a community of which you're a part. Working in a mental health related nonprofit has its own challenges. A lot of what we do at Families for Depression Awareness is support families that are dealing with a mood disorder and something is not going right. Nobody ever calls us and say, hey, just want to let you know that everything's great in my family. Thank you so much for existing. They're getting in touch with us because they have a loved one who maybe has not been diagnosed, and they think that maybe something's going on. Maybe they have a mental health condition, but they're not sure. And so they're looking for guidance. Or they're somebody who there's a separation, a fracture in the family because maybe there's not agreement about what to do. The loved one, let's just say, has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but mom and dad don't agree. Sister doesn't agree with how they should best be supporting that loved one. And then sadly, also, we help families or talk to families and encounter families who have lost somebody to suicide. And so on anybody who has an empathetic kind of spirit, it can be very challenging to do that work. You have to be careful to protect your own space and protect your own emotions, because it's very hard to do this work and to hear these stories and not be affected personally. And as somebody who has had some of the very parallel experiences within my own family, you can, of course, identify with those that we help, and it can be challenging emotionally. The payoff, however, is when you know that you've had a positive impact on somebody's life. You know that education that you're providing is making a difference for somebody, and maybe unifying people that might have otherwise been torn apart by a mental health condition or by suicide loss. So there is an altruistic side of it, and there is an emotional benefit to knowing that you're helping people. You just have to be very, very careful to not burn out yourself and to not become depressed yourself doing work like this.
Yes, definitely. I think that I know we are going to talk about this political season just a little bit, and so I don't want folks to be like, wait, what just happened? But so we want to dive into that piece of like, what are the top 2 to 3 things that come in mind that we can do for our emotional wellness during the political season?
This is going to be a rough next few months. We are in a political season that's very charged, and where people feel passionately on all the issues that are confronting us, from international relations to abortion to voting rights, to inflation. I mean, people feel very passionately about this. And within families, we can't assume that everybody feels the same way. And this goes for Black families or any families. You might have people within the family that disagree politically or on social issues. So protecting your emotional wellness during a political season like this is something that you have to take seriously, because you might turn around one day and say, wait a minute, why am I so sad? Why am I so despondent and hopeless about my future, about my children's future? And if you can correlate that to, I've been watching a lot of opinion news TV lately, you might be able to make some connections that, okay, I need to not disengage, because we don't want to encourage people to not be part of the political process and not be aware and informed. But you have to balance that with a few things. So keeping in the forefront of your mind what you can and can't control, I think that's a good first step. You can control voting on a personal level. You can vote. You can become informed of the political process. You can control how you talk about these issues with others in ways that are constructive. I tend to believe that there is not a whole lot of constructive political discourse that happens on 250 characters at a time. I think sometimes these issues have to be discussed in a way that you can actually make a difference. Otherwise, you're just spewing your opinion on others, and they're spewing their opinion on you, and you're combative, and that's something that doesn't really help your own emotional wellness. Even if in the moment you get the endorphin rush of telling somebody that they're wrong and that their opinion is stupid, I don't think that gives you a good long-term emotional wellness. So just kind of knowing where you can make an impact and where it's not going to lead to any real change, or it's not going to be emotionally beneficial for you in the long term. I think that's half of the battle, recognizing those spaces and places where it does make sense to engage, and others where it doesn't. So those are a couple things that you should be aware of, and then really be aware of how much you are spending of your own emotional time and wellness in engaging in these discourses. If it's part of your job, if you work in political advocacy, or you work for a particular candidate, I think it's unavoidable. But if you are somebody who doesn't, look at how you're spending your time, and be aware of if it's an inordinate amount of time spent on websites or arguing with people, or if it's also causing any disconnect between you and people who you otherwise love and respect. Now, this is not to say that you need to keep people in your orbit who have some fundamental beliefs that are in conflict with who you are as a person and what you believe. But you just have to pick and choose the places that you are in, the content that you consume, and the conversations in which you engage. Because all of that, no matter how much we tell ourselves, oh, I'm just going to get through the day, or that was just a small interaction, they can add up, and they can ultimately lead you to feel poorly. They can affect your mental health. They can affect your emotional health. This is especially true if you are a person who is predisposed to or already has a diagnosed mental health condition. Feeling like the world is coming to an end, or that there's no hope, or people don't really care, it can lead you down a spiral, especially if you're already predisposed to having some more down feelings, more negative feelings.
I literally have been talking to a lot of my clients just about this piece of what's in our control and what's not. And not even just like in this political season, but just in like all the different tragedies that are consistently happening, right? We have Palestine and the wars and a lot of these historical events that kind of repeat themselves. And that really understanding what you have control over is super crucial. So it's not saying we can't do anything, like you're saying, but you must know what you can do. And it looks different for different each of us, right? Like it's not, we might say different things. So I love that you brought that up. Also, how much time we're spending on these pieces. So we have media everywhere. We have, on our phones, news immediately will be shot through our phones. We have YouTubes and the social, it's just everywhere. So I love everything you said about that. And so get into a little bit more. Do you have any tips for staying informed in a way that is safe for our nervous system, though?
Well, first of all, listen to your body, because our body knows things before we sometimes cognitively have processed it. If you find that after listening to this particular thing, or after scrolling and commenting on this other platform, you are feeling anxious, or you're feeling tired, or you're hopeless, or your body is shaking, or you are nauseated, and if your body is telling you these things, then you need to maybe look at that and make some adjustments. If you want to try to stay informed but not have it make you go have bad mental health, have a negative consequences on your emotional health, start with checking your sources. This is something I do a lot, and if you want to be informed, opinion media is not always the best way to go about that. Look for news sources that report the news and give you the facts, and there's no opinions on top of it. There's no fluff, just straight news sources. I'll just say personally, and this is not anybody, nobody has to follow this, but I listen to NPR a lot. I get my news from NPR. I think they're a trusted source. Other people believe that BBC is good, not just for news, but international, and an international source. There are some news outlets that have news presented in a way that is less opinion based, and you can get the facts and stay informed without without getting hyped up. Because remember, these other platforms, they are oftentimes after clicks. They are beholden to media companies, so they need viewership, and their number one priority is not always news. It's not always making sure that you get the information you need to make the decisions you need to make in your life, or to just know what's going on around you. They're there to get you engaged, whatever the means possible. So if you find that you are using a media source or an information source, and you're clicking on the title of something and you found that it was hyperbolic, or it was not really what it was describing. It was just a title that was meant to get your blood pressure up, and then you clicked on the article and it was something different. That may not be the most trustworthy news source. Or maybe it is a news source that gives you some information, but double check those sources, and that way you can be informed about what's going on around you without always having heart palpitations after getting that news. The other thing I would say, and this is generally around politics, not just in politically charged seasons, but anytime, try to look locally, because there's a difference between hearing something on the news about what's happening locally and you being able to verify it yourself because they're talking about the school down the street. Well, you can actually go to the school down the street and see, is this true? Or talk to people who you trust in your community to verify that. It's much more difficult to do that on a national or international stage, because again, if you're not somebody who works in wartime aid, or you're a politician, you're not going to be able to go over to Gaza and see in person what's going on and verify that. So that can lead to more of those powerless feelings. So if you're looking to really stay informed and feel a sense of control and ownership, start locally. These are also the issues and the things that affect your daily life more immediately. And so knowing that your particular town or city or county is dealing with a housing issue, you can find that information. You have the power to verify it within reasonable means, and you can actually do something about it. So try to look at what's going on with your community, what affects your family, what affects your immediate area, because that's information that you can hear, you can verify, and you can engage in change if change needs to happen. And that can lead you to feel more empowered and feel more active in a political process.
I appreciate you highlighting that, because now as an adult, I've come to realize that, because I was really into like ABC 7 News. And so as I've gotten older, I've been like, okay, they do report some of what's going on, but not necessarily for things that I specifically need to know. And just learning from like my elders within the community of like where they get their information from, like in Inglewood in particular, there is a website, a Facebook, and an Instagram called Two Urban Girls, and they report things that are going on in inner cities specifically. And so I've been really thankful to come across platforms like that where it's literally two women and they're going out, finding out things that are going on in the community. They're keeping us aware, even as far as like the mayor is doing some stuff that should not be being done right now in my community. And so they're telling us exactly what's going on and they're bringing the facts in, and I'm actually able to verify these things based off of what they say. So I just want to highlight, like, as an adult, I'm happy that you're highlighting that, because that's not something that I grew up knowing, being that my parents, they just watch the news. And, you know, things are so much more accessible to us now, where I can go on Instagram and type in like Inglewood news reportings, and I can literally find all these different platforms that are telling me, you know, actually what's going on versus the news that's painting a completely different picture. So I just want to highlight that I'm appreciating that. And what were you going to say, Valerie? I'm sorry.
I was going to say as you're saying, there's a place for social media and for alternative media sources that can provide the information that other maybe mainstream sources are not covering or don't have the deep dive into it. And that's a perfect example of that. And the difference, as I was saying before, is that if you're looking at that on a local level, it's more feasible for you to verify and to talk to other members of your community stakeholders, your advocacy leaders, your political leaders, your church members, your YMCA leaders. Yep. You can talk to folks and see, is this really what's going on? And you can get that information that you need and that's affecting your daily life, and figure out if you want to be part of making a change or just continuing good things that are being done.
Yes, that is so true. And so as we transition toward the end of the episode, we always ask folks if there are any takeaways. And so thinking of this political season and just wanting folks to stay in tune with what's going on in their communities, are there any takeaways that kind of come to mind that you want to share with our listeners?
I want to tell your listeners that I'm going to speak specifically to our Black listeners for today, for right now. We've survived so much. We've survived the Middle Passage. We survived enslavement. We survived Jim Crow. We've survived laws that were meant to keep us separate and to keep us disenfranchised. We've survived so much. This political season feels particularly bad, but it's not unique in the experiences that we've had as Black people in America, in that the system was never really made to serve us, and we were never meant to benefit or let alone exceed and do wonderful things and be healthy and strong and engaged and politically powerful and economically powerful. It was never meant to serve us in that way. And so we have had to struggle to have our voices heard, to have our rights, and we've survived. So we can survive whatever happens that comes after this season. I don't want to assume anybody's political affiliation, but whatever you think and whatever you believe, we will survive as a people. It's so important for us to invest in our mental health and our mental wellness for times like this, because we need to be able to have our inner strength, and we need to be able to take care of ourselves as Black women. We need to be practicing our self-care regularly. We need to be doing, even if it's 10 to 15 minutes every day, even if it's just saying no when we feel societal pressure to say yes. We need to be having those practices going on a regular basis, so that when laws come down that we don't agree with, so that when politicians are elected that we wish were not, or when things are going wrong, we have a sense of ourselves and we are centered and we are healthy and we can weather those storms. So it's really important for us to have those practices in place, and to also implement them in the families that we are in. And whatever you can do within your family to make sure that everybody is mentally healthy, mentally well, will ultimately benefit us when times are hard, when times are tough. remember that in a political season like this, you will have people in your own family that you disagree with on one issue or another. Don't let it tear you apart. If it's not if you are somebody who is LGBTQ and you have somebody who hates LGBTQ people, I'm not telling you to keep them in your, keep them around you and subject yourself to abuse. But if there are issues that can be worked through or can be gotten past, try to do that to maintain those relationships. But when you need to set boundaries, when you need to have space from people, even in your family who might be more on the toxic side, implement those boundaries so that you can stay healthy. And just remember that you deserve your own good mental health, and you need to do whatever you can to protect it, while also loving your family, loving your community, and doing what you can to make the world a better place.
Yes. Thank you so much, Valerie, and thank you for joining us today. And that is it for this week's episode of Black Women Healing Podcast.